Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Water Cooler, the world's most statistically average sports podcast, brought to you by the Believe Podcast Network, the #1 podcast network for professionals, featuring 421 shows with a stable of former players and local media personalities. Check us out today at Believe.com. That's BLEAV. My name is Ryan Saber, the most electrifying voice in sports information, and with me, as always,
What up? What up? It's me. It's Lukey C, a.k.a. the Crockpot. What are we talking about today?
Today's a great day. We got a guest, NFL super agent Sam Tiger. We also are going to talk a little NFL free agency week 2, I think, on the heels. After our interview, we'll talk about that. And we're also going to talk the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. But before we get into that, a word from our sponsor. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. The NBA is in full swing and March Madness is here. Last week went 1-1 with my 2 money lines. I had Georgia Tech and Maryland. I split those. Luckily, Georgia Tech was the smaller of the 2, so I won some credits. I won some credits on that. And you had the golf pick. Who'd you take? Did you win? I think is the important thing.
Yeah, of course I won.
He stays hot with the golf. You got any bets this week?
No, I don't.
I do. I'm going under 140 Syracuse versus Houston. Bro, that Syracuse zone in March is like undefeated. I watch Syracuse off and on all year long in ACC play. I mean, obviously you and I live in ACC country now, even though we're Big Ten guys at heart. I see a lot of ACC basketball, and for some reason, man, that Syracuse zone just becomes unpenetrable once the tournament starts. So I'm taking the 140 under. I don't know if they're going to win because that Houston squad looks pretty good, but we're going under 140 Syracuse versus Houston. So head to betonline.ag with your computer or mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sports book experts. With us today, we have NFL agent Sam Tiger. It's an interesting time of the year with free agency. The draft's right around the corner, and we wanted to have you on to introduce, our fans to the business side of the game. And we also wanted to plug Beyond the Negotiation, your podcast with Higgins Success, on the Believe Podcast Network. So let's just start. Sam, how are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. Who am I? I've been in sports and entertainment for like 12 years now. I started out in the college football space, doing events. We just had a couple funny stories that I can't disclose. Maybe I will someday on my own podcast, but started out in the events, marketing, player relations side of things with corporate sports, working in college football at the big bowl games. I interned at some Super Bowls, some Final Fours, really loving March Madness right now. It's so good to have it back. And then I transitioned into the agency space about 6 years ago and started out just in marketing. And then after that, someone like myself was like, I can't be limited to what I can and can't do. So I went ahead and got the certification to become an agent. And I've been in the space now, like I said, about 6 years.
That's awesome. So just going through all that, that's just kind of how you figured out you wanted to be an agent, was just being around it and decided you want to get out of marketing? Or
it wasn't so much that, because I absolutely love marketing and I do my players marketing now, as well as I do have some clients actually in the baseball space where I just do their marketing because I'm not certified to negotiate their contracts. It was more so, as a kid, you see the Jerry Maguires. Ballers wasn't around then. And
Arliss was my show.
You see that. And I didn't know what other kind of areas there were. And I think, we might get into this a bit later, but at that point, I thought you had to go to law school. I thought you had to do all of these different things that I didn't necessarily see kind of in my future. Not that I didn't want to go back to school for an additional degree, but it didn't seem right for me. So that's when I kind of dove into, I like events, I like marketing, I like being around people. And at that point, that's what put me into that space. And then at that in working in college football, I actually got to be one-on-one with a lot of the very high profile schools. So your Alabamas, Auburn, Florida State, Houston, major schools, Georgia Tech, Mississippi State, actually, when Dak was there. And at that point, I got to talk to the players, and I talked about this in my podcast, but there was kind of a moment that clicked for me. And I was talking to a very high profile player. I won't say who it is. I won't say it in my podcast either, but he didn't like his agent. And that, because I was talking to him and I was working at the bowl game, sitting in the player suite. And he's like, I said, okay, so what's next? You're going to go to training, you're going to start training for pro day and the combine. And I said, how's your agency? Are you excited? And he was just like very uneasy about it. And I said, well, what's wrong? And he goes, I just don't feel like I connect with them. They have a good reputation and X, Y, and Z. I just don't feel like, I don't know. He just was very uneasy about it. And at that point I said, there's something wrong here. And that's kind of what drove me into transitioning out of the corporate, I call it, even a lot of them are nonprofit, the bowl games, but that side of things into the player representation, whether it was in the marketing space to start and then on to being a certified agent.
So is that something that's common that players, I mean, I guess it depends on the agent, but have like a level of uncomfort with them at the beginning, or just specifically the one you were talking to?
Not. I mean, mine aren't. Sometimes I'd say TMI, but I would hope not. But then again, Higgins and I had this in a previous podcast conversation. The business, it's tough. It really is. There's a lot of change in representation, and I can see why some agents make it more transactional, because it's upsetting. And I mean, I personally really haven't had to deal with it too much, just a couple situations, but you invest a lot of time, you invest a lot of finances, a lot of different things into it, and then you're terminated and you don't understand why. So I can understand sometimes they might come off transactional. That's just not my approach with it, because that's something that I pride myself on. Is it's a family thing. I don't want to just say, hey, bye when they retire. I really pride myself in working with my guys after they retire because they trust me. I have experience in doing different things. So that's kind of one of my selling points as an agent.
One of the things, I've spent a lot of time listening to Beyond the Negotiation, and that's actually how this whole interaction started. I reached out to you out of the blue because I really enjoyed some of the conversation, and I really encourage all of our fans to listen. But one of the episodes that I really was paying attention to was kind of an interaction between you and Higgins, where you talked about kind of getting into becoming an agent and whether you needed a sports management background or not. Right. And I really enjoyed kind of that exchange. So I guess for all of our young lady and young men fans out there, what is your recommendation to folks who want to become an agent, how to go about it, and maybe some things not to do?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think every time I get asked that, I say you have to look at how are you going to approach this. It's one of those things where there are requirements. So for us as in the NFL, for the NFLPA, you either have to have a graduate degree or a law degree or some sort of, advanced degree, or 7 years of negotiating experience. If you don't have that, however, it's really hard sometimes to prove those 7 years because they have to be adequate and X, Y, and Z. So that's the first component. And then the next is you have to pass the test. So, the passing rate, I think, is about 38%. It's not that hard. You just have to prepare. And we talk about that in our show. So a lot of people go in there, they think it's open CBA. It's collective bargaining agreement plus agent regulations, drug policy, PCP, things like that. So you have to study, or at least know where you're looking. And then, I mean, when you think about it at that point, so say you pass, hopefully you pass, these are things you have to think about before you even go and take the test. How are you going to get the finances to cover representing a player? That's a big part of it. Anybody can get this piece of paper, but you have to get the players then. And the players that are going to get drafted, the players that will sign undrafted. You got the same agents going after all of these people. So it becomes, recruiting's huge. But in that space, we cover their training, we cover different things for them. So you have to have something to be able to kind of back that up, especially if you're going to do it alone. So for some people, they say, well, I don't know how I could get X amount of money to kind of just have sitting there to be able to push out at one time. And I say, are you interested in practicing law? Maybe that's a way to do it. And then some other people work in jobs where they do marketing or things of that nature. So I think it just kind of depends. And I will say, though, we're in a time where our players, I don't want to say expect, that's a bad word, but we succeed in doing a lot of different things. So the fact that I can provide marketing, I do nonprofits for my players, I do events, contract negotiations, all of these different things. I got that through taking the business route, through taking the sports management route. And then at that point, I do take additional law and contract law classes, whether it's Stanford, getting, additional credentials, but I never intended to practice law. So that worked for me. So it's always what works for you.
Yeah, you mentioned recruiting's very big. I imagine it's a very competitive space there. So can you walk us through a little bit the process of recruiting a new client?
Well,
I'm sure they're all different, but
are you talking like a college player or a player that's currently under NFL contract?
Oh, that's a great question.
Let's do college. I'm interested once these guys are coming out, especially,
Okay.
You got different levels, right? You got the blue chip guys that, are going first, second round, day one, day two. And then you got the guys that, may go at the end or undrafted. So I'm interested to hear the differences there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily think there are too many differences. I think that, there are agents that I know that are independent that go up against agencies that represent first round players. And those are usually your large agencies. They're your Drew Rosenhaus, they're your CAAs. It's just, and I understand. Come on, you can't even argue against that. But I think, at least for me in particular, I look at it in the space of, okay, I usually am going after like mid to late priority free agent players, because that becomes more realistic for me in someone that is independent, and I'm not with a big agency. I don't have a entertainer to back me, and some of these do, and that's fine, that's their choice. But for me, what does that look like? A lot of times it looks like a DM on social media. Sometimes I'll follow a player and then we'll start communicating that way. In certain schools, and I know we talked about this, there are certain states, we have to be registered in the state to recruit. And most of the states have some sort of a regulation. There are very few that don't, but sometimes you have to go through the school and then you have to go on a Zoom with people from the school. For most of the time, we don't like that, to be honest with you, because it adds a lot to it. But you really just started relationship. And from my perspective, you start a relationship and you hope that carries on until close to when they're coming out. Because at the end of somebody, I'll give an example. Say I'm recruiting like a third, fourth rounder. And this is actually a very realistic situation for me. Having this relationship, building it, gone out to games, he's going to be playing his senior year this year. So I'm hoping that the relationship will sustain, that when the bigger agencies, and I see the follows, I see it happening. I'm hoping that relationship will stand when the bigger agencies come in, because they will. And unfortunately, that is what happens a lot. So it's kind of one of those things that it becomes a numbers game in recruiting. And it also, everyone has their different tactics to it. For me, it's really just being honest, checking up on the players. And I think some agents, Higgins and I talked about that, especially this year. We were kind of in a weird space where me in particular, I didn't want to be texting and calling players when we didn't even know if they were going to have a season. So that ended up hurting me this year. So now, how's everything going? Coming to your spring game. We're going to do this, this, and that. So different mindset, but we also never had the pandemic like this before. So can't beat myself up too much.
Oh, definitely not.
Luke, I know you want to ask something about NFL free agency. I think this is a good segue to that.
Yeah, so we just recently had the legal tampering period, is what they call it, and I was just wondering what that's like. Is it just, are you calling teams? Are they calling you? Is it just like, I know you said you don't negotiate contracts per se, but are you just on the phone just nonstop?
Oh, I mean, I do. I think that was when you get certified in your particular with the NFLPA, I negotiate their contracts. Now, sometimes there'll be sometimes one player will have 5 agents. So you don't have 5 agents calling. It really depends. I mean, it's one of those things that it depends on the player. I mean, free agency as a whole, not even discussing any periods, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. I'll tell you that. And you are calling, you are reaching out, and COVID has absolutely changed things in the sense that teams are looking at workout videos from players at their facilities. And it's been very strange lately, at least this time. And we're over the 1-year mark of COVID. And like I said, last year, we didn't discuss this, and I don't think it's too big to discuss, but COVID completely changed everything. And I will say, from like an agent perspective, the last year was absolutely wild, even though things seem normal. Because I remember I was obviously, watching games. We weren't really going to games. We weren't doing all of these things. We didn't go to pro day. And I was like, wow, like they did a really great job of making this seem like everything's great. And unfortunately, it wasn't. I mean, we didn't have mini camps. We don't know if we're going to have that this year. We don't know if we're going to go into camp at 80 or 90, which is huge. And no combine this year. So, I mean, not just free agency, but I think just the whole process has completely changed from our perspective, even though it looks the same to fans and to the outside. Yeah, it's wild. And, that's kind of all I have to say there. It is like the wild, wild west. I'll tell you that.
You talked about ballers. You talked about, Jerry Maguire was the one that I grew up on. The whole
help me help you.
That's right.
That is me. I am that Jerry. That is my Jerry.
I love Bob Sugar. I love the character that Jay Moore played. He was such a shark. And I'm sure in your business, you deal with a lot of individuals like that.
Yes.
We talked about the fun stuff of being an agent, right? Interacting with players, building those relationships, working with the teams. What's your least favorite thing about being an agent?
I think it's the expectations and the misconceptions. And that's a huge theme of our podcast is misconceptions. The expectations it's something in the sense that players, parents, people think that we can just pick up our phones and call a GM or someone and say, hey, look at my player. And I mean, the player definitely probably deserves that chance, but we can't do that. We can't walk in and knock on the door and force them. And that is the thing. And social media, I think, has made this harder because you have fans saying it. And I went through this the past free agency, just with a player that we were looking to get him back into the NFL. And I saw fans, and it was just like, what's your agent doing? And I'm like, everything I possibly can. But then you can't really say that, so I think it's managing expectations and also knowing what you're doing and being very strong in your own morals and conscience. But it's hard. It really is, because we have to be on all the time too. And I think people don't realize that. And once again, reverting to the Jerry Maguire, it's super funny. I remember the first scene where, he's not in the picture, but that's kind of real too.
Right. When they're taking all the pictures of like on the red carpet and stuff.
Yeah. But it's great. And I always say this, I would not be doing this if I didn't believe this is what I was supposed to be doing. But it takes time for this to kind of set it. It takes time for the people around you to understand. Sometimes the phone's always up. I mean, and personally for me, I've been on like dates where I'm like, the phone's always going to be up. At that time, I had 2 phones. I couldn't do the 2 phone thing. So shout out to all the agents that do. And he was like, is that a joke? And I was like, no, not at all. Didn't work. So I think it's just, like I said, misconceptions and expectations that is hard. And it's one of those things. I think there are a lot of careers that are like that. But in our world, once again, to revert back to that, what people see is not what it is. It's not like that. There are really cool moments, and I will give you that. There are moments where I'm on the sidelines and, in a golf cart with, somebody on the team and they're pulling up and I'm next to an owner. Like, those are cool moments, but that is not the regular for most agents. And I don't say all, because there are agents that, walk into a facility and there it is. But that's not the norm.
Yeah, it certainly gets sensationalized, right? I mean, we talk about ballers, even though those guys aren't agents, they're money managers. We talk about Jerry Maguire, Entourage, right? You got the Ari Gold, the super agent who, is basically as big of a star.
I've never seen that show. Yeah.
Right. But
I get really frustrated at those shows. And a couple of my friends have been like, you're like The Rock. And I was like, I don't even know what to say to that. But I guess I'm going to take that as a compliment. So
it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
I guess.
So I guess the last question I had for you is what the actual process of like negotiating with teams. Is it like just a back and forth, just nonstop, or is it just, a couple calls?
It depends on the contract. It really does. So there's not too much negotiating that goes into a rookie contract. And I'll tell you this, and this can kind of say a lot of things. When it goes into like a rookie contract, so a player's lucky to get to their second contract. We can be clear on that, correct? Yep. So let's talk about a first contract. A lot of agents, obviously, we want to get them a signing bonus. It's just the players want a signing bonus. Of course, we want to get them a signing bonus. Last year, one of my mentors called me right before the draft and was like, Sam, take anything you effing get. And I was like, that was my plan. Like, I'm not going to nickel and dime like excuse me, like we're in a pandemic. And in my mind, I was like, that was my mentality. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. We had teams calling I had a linebacker out of Indiana, and we had teams calling, and it just didn't work out. And it was one of those things where just, it was what it was. However, I knew people that I respect that ended up kind of trying to kind of nickel and dime things in a sense. And when they went back, the offer was off the table. I probably would have done the same thing in another year. You want to get the most, and we're provided resources to reference. Okay, so last year, this is what the signing bonus average was for this position with this team. And you reference that, and you want that because you don't want to be that agent that's like, oh yeah, I'm going to take, $1,000 when the average was $8,000. However, we're in a different situation. So, I think for me, it's just keeping it relative, and keeping it reasonable. And it's big in communicating with your client. That's one of those things where there can be a situation where the client wants one thing. And I've gone through this. He wanted this. He wanted this amount. We wanted that amount. And I knew, I could feel it. If we don't go for what it is, we had already kind of gone back and forth a bit, and it usually doesn't take too long for the most part. And are we going to really do this for a small amount? We checked off, because I always go and I write down things that we want, things that we're getting, and then we communicate it. And we had checked off most of the boxes. And I said, this is a great offer, we really should just move forward. And it's that trust factor that kicks in there. So it doesn't take too long. I mean, I have not represented a Dak Prescott or anyone like that. So I don't know. I mean, hopefully someday, you guys can have me back on and I can disclose something like that. But for the most part, I think that it depends on who you're working with. But I believe when the team wants the player, it moves pretty fast.
That makes sense. Number one, we'll definitely have you back on. All right. I think that's a given because there's obviously a lot more to touch on. The one thing I do want to ask, I think the NFL gets this reputation for being sort of like the most cutthroat business really in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the universe, because I think they are, especially how they deal with players, especially towards the end of their careers and those kind of things. So it was interesting when you were kind of talking through the discussions. Do NFL teams, are they susceptible to those conversations about numbers and averages and, last year, this group of players averaged this kind of money? Or are these guys always trying to squeeze you, always trying to take advantage of opportunities, always trying to, look, we're in a pandemic, or, hey, the salary cap went down to 182 million this year. Like, are they always trying to take advantage of situations, or is it generally a data-driven business?
That's a good question. I would say, yes and no, to be honest with you. I think that it depends on the situation. It depends on the player. And it depends on the team. It depends on who you're dealing with. I think that's just what it is. I think that there are a lot of teams that are just like that. And they are just looking to, let's really, we don't have to go into this too much, but like the Taysom Hill thing, like people were like, oh my God. And I was like, oh no, this is, even one of my former players texted me, was like, I'm so confused. Why is this a fake contract? And I literally texted him like this long essay. And he was like, I'm like, yeah, I know. When Adam said that, I was just like, I shook my head and like, people are about to lose their damn minds because this is not what it is.
Until I figured out what was happening, I lost my damn mind. I'm like, they're paying that guy 140 million.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is very confusing, and it's a way to just move around money to get more cap space because they were in the red. But I think it just depends. And I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for, but it definitely depends. And I think unfortunately, I think more teams are on that business side of things, like, hey, this is what it is, versus the other. But there are. And there are teams out there that absolutely genuinely care about their players that are in the later stages of their careers. I can give you a good example. One of my clients, and won't say who the team is, but he's played for 6-7 teams. And one of them, and it was only a 1-year deal where he played there, the GM there sat him down and was like, hey, what do you want to do next? And he was like, what, is it like, do I want to stay here? And he was like, no, like outside of football, like what's next for you? And at that point, he's very business savvy. And he said, he played for all these different teams and worked with all these different people. He's like, that's the first time someone actually like took time to ask me what I like to do outside of football and knew that I'm entering the end of my career. What's next? And he's like, I'll never forget that. And I think that says a lot about this GM. And, I assume this team is going to continue to have a really, really, really good standing and, continue to thrive. So it says a lot when you have that mentality where they're not just numbers, they're people too.
That's a great story.
Well, Sam Tiger, NFL super agent, thank you for being on the water cooler. We really appreciate it. Do me a favor, plug your social media, plug Beyond the Negotiation, plug anything you want to plug before you get off.
I'm not good at that's something I need to work on. That was one of my New Year's resolutions, was getting better at pushing myself out on social media and everything, because I like to get off this phone. But my Instagram is samtiger_agent. Our podcast is Beyond the Negotiation, and it's not just agent talk. It's very like it's a lot. It's a lot, but it's great. You definitely should tune in. Anyone that's interested in sports or sports biz, students, people looking to switch, or even people just looking to kind of get an insight on the agent side of things and hear us talk about different things. And I've got my clients on there, some juicy ones actually. So, give us a follow, listen, subscribe. So thank you so much for having me on as well.
New episodes every Friday, right?
Yes, every Friday, but Sam's on the road a lot and Sam's the one that edits it. So we do our best.
Okay. Well, Sam Tiger, thank you. We appreciate you. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, guys.
It's a great interview there with Sam Tiger. Outstanding. We haven't had an interview in a while. The last interview we had was Brad Lambert. We had Chops. So if you guys haven't heard those interviews, we recommend you go back and take a listen to those. Certainly check out Beyond the Negotiation with Sam and Higgins Success. It's a great podcast. But let's get into the second week of the NCAA tournament. Lots of upsets, right? Virginia, Iowa, Texas, Purdue, Ohio State lost to the Oral Roberts University, and West Virginia. There's a 15, a 12, and 2 11s already in the Sweet 16. What was the biggest surprise for you so far?
This is wild, man. It kind of reminds me of the year that who was it? George Mason and VCU both made the Final Four as 11 seeds. Your boys that you picked against in the first round, Loyola, still cruising.
Look, she wasn't supposed to be there, bro. That was a last minute audible. Sister Jean's in the building. Damn it.
Knocking off the Big Ten champs after that as well. So I think the biggest surprise, I mean, it's got to be Oral Roberts, right? Ohio State was a 2 seed. They were top 5 for, after they had gotten up there, that for most of the second half of the season there. They struggled down the close, but did okay in the Big Ten tournament. But not just winning that one, but backing it up and then beating Florida, coming from behind to beat Florida in the second round to cash their ticket to the Sweet 16. Anytime a 15 gets there, it's I think that's the eye opener. What about for you?
Yeah, look, I think I got 2. You talked about Loyola. Loyola Chicago. They dominated Illinois.
Well, one thing I looked up was in the KenPom, they were ranked like 9th. So like it was kind of crazy that they had an 8 seed to begin with because they had played so well during the year.
That kid that plays center for them,
he's so much fun to watch, dude. He's
with
so
the
much
mustache.
Fun.
He
Krutwig, whatever.
Listen to me. It looks like he does not look like a basketball player. It's almost like he's wearing a costume to look like, or he's like purposely trying to make himself look like he looks almost like an offensive lineman or something. You know what I mean? But I
can't believe he moves as well as he's
like a ballerina, bro.
He locked up the game too with the steal there.
Yeah,
in the last minute,
he had hands. He had hands there at the end. I think they're a big one, but I'm going to go out on a limb here. A team that actually won this afternoon, UCLA. No first 4 team has ever made it to the Sweet 16. And, they beat Michigan State. They took Michigan State to overtime and beat them. I told you last week that I thought that Michigan State would have been the team that surprised everybody and made it to the Sweet 16, but UCLA was able to take the road. I thought Michigan State was. So I think they're a real big surprise. What does your Final Four look like?
It's in tatters. I had Alabama still alive, and Gonzaga still alive, and then on the other side I had Illinois and Ohio State. So I got lost one in the first round and then one in the second round. So that whole side is out. So my champs are still alive. Gonzaga won this afternoon to beat Oklahoma. So I'm still in good shape moving forward, but with the champ anyway. But I'm pretty much out of the pool. So
I think as long as you got Gonzaga, you're good. I mean, look, with all the upsets and everything that we're seeing, I think the one thing that's pretty certain is that Gonzaga team is the number one overall seed for a reason. At this point, it's really just who's going to make it around them and who are they going to play in the championship. I could be wrong. They could trip up along the way, but that team's pretty good. There's a lot of talent on that team. They're obviously well coached with Mark Few. So I've lost one team. I lost Illinois. I still got Bam. I still got the Zags, and I still got my darling, my sweetheart, them Razorbacks.
And hey, they were what, down 14 in the first game to Colgate before they ended up winning by like 20 or some shit.
And then the same thing happened to them last night where they were up 14 and then they were playing Texas Tech. Texas Tech scored 11 points in like
because I had
20 seconds.
I had Texas Tech in one of my random pools where you just get assigned a team. So I had my eye on that game for a little bit, and then it became the ending was nuts though.
Yeah.
So
yes, I mean they ended up winning by 2. That Arkansas team's fun. They got that Moody kid who's a freshman. They got a good team. We'll see. I was maybe a little bit too optimistic on them, calling them a mix of the Warriors and the D'Antoni Phoenix Sun teams. So
I'm not gonna lie, I hadn't watched a whole bunch of Arkansas basketball, but that caught my attention. And I almost hit you up on the first when I'm like, oh, they're down by 16 to Colgate.
I watched them play 2 games on last weekend, and I based the whole season in the bracket on that. So we'll see what happens. But looking forward to, obviously Michigan's playing right now. They're tied with LSU, and there's a couple more good games. Who else has to play tonight? For the rest of tonight, there's
Maryland and Alabama, and then USC and Kansas.
And Colorado, Florida State's on right now.
Live right now.
And Florida State's up. So some games still left, but we'll continue to talk about this as it progresses. Let's talk NFL free agency. And we just, like I said, had the interview with Sam Tiger, and she kind of broke down free agency and how that works. It's definitely interesting to hear the business side of the game. But, with all that happening, there's all this movement going on in the NFL right now. And it's crazy. Some of the money that's getting thrown out, some of the teams that are doing things that they don't traditionally do. Right now, who's the team that you're looking at? I'm always hesitant to say one free agency. Okay. So we're not going to say who won free agency, but what team do you think improved themselves the most over the first week of free agency?
That's an interesting question that could go a couple of different ways, but I'll just say, I guess if the teams that I think improved the best, I think it's the Patriots. Like, I don't love all of their contracts and the signings necessarily, but I kind of see what they're trying to do a little bit. And, I don't think there's any question that they're like the most improved team from the start of free agency till now. They added the 2 tight ends, Judon, the pass rusher, and, several other guys on the other side, a couple linemen, a couple receivers. I don't like necessarily the contracts. But who knows? We'll see how they're structured and how it works out for them down the line. I definitely think that they were the team that improved the most. I'm not necessarily saying that they had the best free agency period, though. What about you?
Okay, so who do you think had the best free agency period?
I hate sounding like a homer, but like Andrew Berry did work. We talked about it last week with Johnson, and then he gets a very, very favorable team deal with Troy Hill done. They add Malik Jackson. There's.
Don't forget about my boy.
They brought back Malcolm Smith to start, who will be playing majority of the snaps. Boy. It's that one's a little head scratching to me.
Not to Darius Leonard, it's not.
Anthony
Darius
Walker.
Leonard did a fucking video on Instagram about how much he's gonna miss Anthony Walker.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that he lost his friend, but he's on another team now. So no, I think that they probably had one of the best hauls, I would say, as far as value and filling needs and the player and the talent that they added.
I was screaming. Did you mention Malik Jackson?
I did mention Malik Jackson.
I was a little too excited about Anthony Walker.
I was real big on him. I wanted him last year, if you remember. And he didn't have a great year in Philly. He only had 33 total pressures, 3 sacks, down from what had been his averages. But he's 31 years old, so I think he'll be a great rotational piece for us. You got him on a 1-year deal. mix in there with Richardson and Billings and the kid we drafted last year from Missouri, Elliott. So I like it. I like what they did.
Yeah,
had a very clear plan.
Yeah, look, I think you talked about New England. I mean, just from the sheer volume, that's a team that traditionally doesn't get buck wild in free agency. Buck wild doesn't go crazy in free agency, and they certainly did. Some of the signings, to your point, I didn't love. Some of them I liked a lot. I like both the tight ends. I like the Judon. They got all the guys coming back that opted out. That team's just going to look really different. They still don't have the quarterback situation figured out, so I'm interested to see if there's some kind of a trade-up situation in the draft. I don't know if there's going to be, right? Because who are the teams that you're going to be able to trade up with? Miami.
They all need quarterbacks too.
Miami ain't letting New England come up there. The Jets ain't letting New England come up there. Maybe Atlanta. I don't know. Somebody said it on ESPN today. Basically, 8's the floor, right? Where Carolina currently sits is probably the floor for where those 4 quarterbacks are going to be at. So I don't know if New England's going to be able to have a chance. So a lot of what they're doing could be for naught a little bit. Not to say that I don't have a lot of faith in Cam. Cam maybe with a good offseason and, being in the system has an opportunity to go out and be, close to what he was before. But I saw him throw a lot of bouncers last year. So, and the year before, to be honest. So we'll see. I think the team that did the best, and they really didn't sign any free agents. They just re-signed all their guys. And I'm going to go with Tampa Bay. I think Tampa Bay going out, keeping Godwin, keeping Shaq Barrett, keeping Levante David, keeping Gronk. Look, sometimes the best move is to not let other teams take your good players, and they made the right moves, made the right signings. Their Hall of Fame quarterback was able to move some money around to enable them to bring Shaq Barrett back. So I would say that I think when you look at free agency and how it's panned out so far, just the fact that Tampa Bay was able to maneuver and not lose, because you and I had this, we talked about this not too long ago, where we thought they were going to lose all 3 of them. There was potential for them to lose all 3 of those guys, right? Levante David, Shaq Barrett, and Godwin, and they were able to keep them. So I like that. So let's talk specifics. We've talked about John Johnson, JJ3, talked about some other guys. If you had to pinpoint the one guy, maybe non-Browns, right? What's the best signing so far in your mind?
Well, I think to me it comes down to 2. I'll mention this first one is Kansas City Chiefs signed Kyle Long coming back out of retirement. He sat out. I think last year was he retired, so he didn't play last year. They signed him to a 1-year, I think it was $3.5 million deal. That one comes with a caveat since he did miss a year, so we'll see how it ends up. But I think the best overall value signing was Hassan Reddick with the Panthers. We killed him on last week's show because they had signed.
Justifiably so.
Deservedly so, signing Cam Irving and Pat Elflein. And I'm not going to say they quite made up for it here, but that's a great deal. 1 year, $6 million, up to $8 million. He had 12.5 sacks last year. That's not who he is. 5 of them came in one game versus the Giants. So he's not a guy that's going to. He's not going to stuff the stat sheet on the sacks thing. He's a great pass rusher, and to get him on a deal like that is pretty good. And maybe it works out and they see him, they see extending him for an extra, or, beyond this year after this cap hurt year. So, but I think that was the best value deal of after the initial rush of free agency.
My probably favorite signing was the Curtis Samuel to Washington. I thought they overpaid for him a little bit. What was the money on that? It was, I think they ended up giving
10 years or 10 million. I mean,
10 million a year. Maybe they overpaid for him a little bit. I really like that Curtis Samuel signing, but the one that I think was the absolute best, and it's just, it's a total New England situation. I text you about this. Kyle Van Noy, right? New England signs Kyle Van Noy for 2 years, $13 million. So they're bringing a guy back that can be the anchor on their defense. He knows the defensive scheme. He's won championships with them. He still has tread left on the tire. But what makes that deal even better, right? They're only paying him $6.5 million a year. Oh, by the way, he went to Miami last year in free agency and signed like a $56 million deal. And Miami couldn't afford him, so they cut him. And New England's getting a 4th round compensatory pick for him too. So not only does New England get an anchor of their defense back, probably one of their team captains, a guy that they've won Super Bowls with, and they get him for way less than they would have had to have signed him for last year, and they get a 4th round draft pick for it. To me, I feel like that is just, from a value standpoint, all the way around the best signing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. He took a step back, but with Miami, he took a step back, but that is not uncommon. Okay, as a guy that had a front row seat to this, when Jamie Collins came over from, we traded for him.
And then went back and made the Pro Bowl.
And then went back and was really bad in Cleveland and went back and was really good. So that maybe this just adds to your point that this is just an incredible sign. But he did take a step back. But
I didn't even think about that.
If you're the Patriots, I don't think that that concerns you, because they're going to know how to maximize them. But you mentioned Curtis Samuel. I really like what they did this offseason too. Added Fitzpatrick on the 1-year deal, and you mentioned Curtis Samuel was 3 years, 34.5. And William Jackson, 3 years at $42 million, $26 million guaranteed. Maybe a little on the heavy side.
You were a William Jackson guy, right?
I was in on Jackson. I was thinking closer to like $10 million a year. But that's not what he ended up getting. So yeah, I do like what they're doing. And that defense, we know that defense year over year is pretty volatile. It's not real, things like turnovers and sacks and stuff like that aren't sticky year to year. But if they're able to look a little bit like last year, they should be able to overcome the the mistakes that Fitz is going to make, because he's going to chuck it.
All right, quick. Don't even think about it. Rank the NFC quarterbacks right now. Go.
Dak, Fitz, Jones. Who am I missing?
Jalen.
Yeah,
Hurts.
God, that's it.
Woo. I mean, yeah, right. I mean, they signed the guy that gives them, he's the second best quarterback in the division. That's exactly how I would have ranked them, which is crazy, right? They give him $10 million. He's not going to lose them games. He's not going to go out there. I mean, he wins sometimes. Fitz magic. Look, I like, you're right. I like what Washington did in general. We've talked a lot of positive. What do you think is the worst signing? We're not even going to go down the road of worst teams. Let's just talk about the maybe one or two guys that you thought were the worst signings for teams.
The Leonard Floyd deal was pretty head scratching to me. He got 4 years, $64 million, 32.5. And I think that they were doing it the correct way. The last 2 years where they brought in the kid that went to Florida and played in Atlanta. Oh my God, what's his name? The pass rusher. I can't remember his name, but he comes in and plays next to Aaron Donald, gets 10 sacks, and then he leaves for a bigger deal the next year. They do the same thing with Leonard Floyd. Bring him in. He has a great year. Okay. He's still got another year left on his deal. Let him play it out and then just move on to the next one, because they're playing next to fucking Aaron Donald. Instead, they give him $64 million, 32.5 guaranteed. A guy that had never really been that great. And we saw a few of those deals. The Denver signed Ronald Darby to 3 years, $30 million. But that one really stuck out to me. But I think the worst was, and this is not even a crush at the player, because I really like the player. It's Kenyon Drake, 2 years, $14 million, 11 guaranteed. Like, what the fuck are you doing, Gruden? You drafted a running back in the first round like 2 years ago, and you bring in Drake, who I like as a player. I think that $7 million for a starting running back is great. $7 million for a guy that you're probably going to flex him out of the backfield quite a bit. He's not going to get the touches that he should with splitting that backfield with running back's name, Josh Jacobs.
Josh Jacobs.
So I don't know. I just and just them in general, but getting rid of their entire. We're not going to go down it with the Raiders, but yeah, those were the two that really stuck out to me.
I had Leonard Floyd on that list for sure. Juju, man, like, I don't know. I've been hearing a lot of people I think people are romanticizing Juju's actual ability. He's kind of slow. I think that Pittsburgh's got a lot of problems, and bringing back that guy just so he doesn't sign with Baltimore. That's basically why they brought him back. I think at least this is just my speculation. I think bringing him back, would they give him $8 million or something? Which it's not a terrible deal. That team needs to start focusing on. Well, you know what? No, they don't need. I'm glad they did it. Actually, I'm glad they still got Ben Roethlisberger on the books. I'm glad they're paying Juju. I'm glad they're gonna have to. They're gonna continue to put themselves in salary cap hell. So, but I think that was a terrible signing. But I think the worst one was Bud Dupree. The Titans, 5 years, up to $85 million on that deal. A lot of his stats have to do with the fact that playing next to TJ Watt, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Like maybe TJ Watt's going to be a bum next year and Bud Dupree's going to ball out in Tennessee. I don't right. I see the look on your face. The fans aren't going to see the video, but you feel the same way I do. I don't know. That feels like a lot of money. I thought that, and this is one of your guys, the defensive end from the Saints, Trey Hendrickson, they gave him like $60 million.
Too rich for me. I liked him. That was a little too rich for me.
I thought that entire pass rusher market just got a little out of hand.
Actually, funny, we just talked about the Raiders, but they actually ended up with the best deal with Ngakoue at 2 for $26. So
right, which we were talking last week on basically how they traded him for
Aguilar.
So there's still a lot of guys left out there. Last week you asked me a question, I didn't answer it. You asked me what about Clowney, and we kind of started talking about something else. He hasn't signed, right?
Mm-mm.
I mean, shit. I'll take Clowney. What did we offer him last year? 12 million? 1 year, 12 million, I think was the deal. I mean, if you could bring in,
I think they were willing to go a little bit higher. I think it was a little bit more than that, but yeah, I think that's what it was.
If you could bring Clowney in for 1 year for 10, 12 million, would you do it?
At 12, probably not. I was thinking more like 8, but he's a guy that likes to maximize his dollar. He's going to wait as long as possible. He's not in any rush to sign anywhere. And that's not a criticism. Okay.
No,
get your money, do what you can. But he wasn't very good. And last year, so that, I don't know, that kind of stuff. Just, if you can get him for $8 million for 1 year, fine. I mean, you're not going to make a big investment in him anyway. I think he's probably a guy that's going to play the rest of his career on those 1 and 2 year deals anyway. So yeah, I mean,
like an Ndamukong Suh.
Yeah. Just like that. Only not as good a football player, but but yeah, I think 12 is too much. I'd like it right around 8.
Anything with Conley? I know the Browns were talking. Did they ever ultimately sign Conley? Is that still happening?
No. I mean, they haven't signed him as of yet. The last I had heard was he was looking for some more money.
Well, the Browns certainly need more help in the secondary. I'm not confident. Why not bring back Money Mitch? They didn't pay him that much. Houston only paid him like what, $4 or $5 million a year, even if that.
Well, I think they had their eyes on guys like Hill,
which they got, which was a great signing. Youngstown guy, right?
Yeah, Brian Poole. So they had their eyes on, and they were in contact with several slot corners. So, and to be honest with you, nothing wrong with Mitch. I like Mitch as a player, but these guys are just a little bit younger, a little bit better.
They got a lot of faith in Grady Williams, I think.
I don't think they do.
You think they're going to draft a corner in the first 2 rounds?
I think they're going to sign one.
You think they're still going to sign somebody?
And I think they're going to add somebody else. I think they view Greedy as a complete. If he comes back at all, then that's a bonus. I don't think they have any kind of expectation for him at all.
It's really interesting. They did really good in free agency, and now it's almost like they're in a position, which is where you want to be, where best available every time. There's areas of need, right? I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but they're almost in position where they can just kind of draft best available all the way down the board.
Yeah, there's some holes, but I don't think you want to, especially if you're picking, in the back half of the first, I don't think you really should be drafting for need anyway.
I'd love for them to trade out at 26. especially if somebody gets hot for, Mac Jones isn't going to slip. I've seen some mocks where he slides. That ain't going to happen. But maybe somebody gets hot for, Kyle Trask or something along those lines. I don't know. I would love for them to be able to trade out of 26.
Mac Jones should slip.
That's correct. He will. I am going to quote my favorite co-host. He is going to get a GM fired. So in the coming weeks,
I think you're a little too rough on Juju, man. 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns as a 22-year-old. And I understand he had Antonio Brown on the other side, and he has been underwhelming as a number one pass catcher, number one option. That is fair, and I don't want him to be my number one pass catcher. He had talked with Baltimore and KC. I think he would have been absolute dynamite in KC. He's better than Sammy Watkins has ever dreamed of being, and he would have killed it there as their wide receiver 2 and third passing option.
I think you could be dynamite in Kansas City out there running around.
Then why isn't Watkins? Why isn't the kid from Georgia?
Sammy Watkins had a few big games. He's getting paid $14 million a year. He's getting paid like $3 million per touchdown. All right. So in the coming weeks, we're hot and heavy in the NFL offseason. We may touch on free agency a little bit more. I doubt it. At this point forward, it's really going to be draft conversations. I know I've been promising it for the last few weeks. There will be a baseball preview coming, a MLB season preview. I promise that. Next week, for our motorsports fans out there, we still got to line this up, but they were interested. Luke's got 2 buddies that love Formula One. The Formula One season starts, I don't know, in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to have them on, and we're going to talk a little Formula One for the high-end racing fans out there. Don't forget, at WC Sports Pod, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Luke, what are your social media handles?
At 330 Luke on Twitter and at LukeyTC on Instagram.
I am Mr. Sabertooth everywhere. We are now available on all your favorite streaming platforms: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you consume podcasts, you can find us. We are also available on the Believe Podcast Network, number one podcast network for professionals. Check us out today at Believe.com. That's BLEAV. With that, we love you. We want to thank Sam Tiger for being on the show, and
awesome.
Enjoy your lives.
Andrew Berry, the GOAT. Somebody suck me.
Man.